use of money. Earn all we can, save all we can, and give all we can. A little overview. It'll be a tad bit longer than usual today. So I'm going to prepare you a bit for that. Talk a little bit about Wesley and what he thought about money. Bring it up to 2019 and how that's working for some of our younger Christian friends. Share some personal reflections, and then end with some direct quotes from Wesley. This particular text that the birthday gal read just a little while ago was used in over 40 sermons by Wesley in a short period of time. And Wesley got out to the people in England and shared the good news, but he used this particular text. And I believe the reason was is he understood that sometimes it's easier for us to get money be the priority than God to be the priority. Thus, the last line, you can't serve both God and the bank, or you can't serve two masters at the same time. And I really like the way that it was stated in the Message Bible. And it starts with this person that's unscrupulous, but then Jesus goes on to say, we can learn from that. We can get creative in how we go about our lives. We can get creative about our financial survival in 2019. And maybe that's what it takes to make people where they are, is to be a little bit more creative in how we fund our budget and how we invite people in to being part of the mission and ministry, which is Pine Grove United Methodist Church. Now for Wesley, earning and saving and giving was not optional. They just went together by hand in glove. If you proclaim Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, you gave. He just didn't see it as any other way. If you say, God saved me, I'm going to go to heaven, you gave the wretches of this world a helping hand. You didn't ask them why they needed it and do this or that. You just gave. You helped others the most you could. He didn't see it as something to even consider anything else. And that's why he preached about it so much. The least of these, Jesus tells us in Matthew 25, whenever you did it for the least of these, that was me, you did it to me. And for Wesley, if you said you were a Christian, if you said you were a follower of Jesus, you believed in that strongly. And Wesley really lived that point. Two examples about that. When he died, his funeral instructions were, his pallbearers should be the poorest people in town. Because in his time, in England 300 years ago, the pallbearers got paid. So he didn't want the deacons of the church, or the elders of the church, or his clergy friends to be pallbearers. I wanted the poorest people in town. He didn't even know, because he knew that they would be paid, and the money would really make a difference to them. He also knew, that was a custom in his time, that they would put black drapes over all the windows, or stained glass they may have had. And he said, you're going to take all those black drapes down, because it's my funeral, and you're going to make dresses for the poor, because they need to have that material and they can't afford it. And finally he said, if I die with more than a nickel to my name, you'll know that I have stolen from God. So he didn't think that accumulation of money, the saving, was so important. It was all about the giving of money. So now let us shift gears a little bit. We'll get back to Wesley. But I want to share with you some thoughts from a young mom. She's also a United Methodist minister. She serves down in Virginia. Her name is Melissa Floyer Bixler. Melissa Floyer Bixler, B-I-X-L-E-R, in case you want to look her up at some time. In addition to being a pastor, serving a large church that has a lot of young people, she also is a noted contemporary Christian theologian and writer. And in April this year, she wrote a piece called "Capitalism is Killing the Small Church." And the reality is that most Methodist churches, you might be considered small. And by some regards, we may fit into that category. Capitalism is killing the small church. And I ask you to just listen to what she has to say with an open mind. I know maybe for some a little bit difficult to hear, but I think she makes some good points. And if for the church is going to survive, if we're going to get creative in our survival, as it says, as Jesus said in the parable from Luke, then we need to know where our younger friends are. And as we look around today, and our friends that are here, most of them are not here with us. Maybe some of this may ring true as to why they can't be. So here's an excerpt from Reverend Bixler's piece, "Capitalism is Killing the Church." Quote, "Most young adults I know pick up extra work in addition to their full-time jobs or their schooling. They don't spend their evenings at worship committee meetings or planning children's ministry. They don't spend their evenings at church committee meetings or planning ministries. For churches whose greatest need is time," she says, "an economic model that prizes those who work the longest creates an impossible competition." Do you hear what she's saying? People need to work 50 or 60 hours to get by, to pay the mortgage, yet we expect them, when they become involved in the church, to volunteer for evening meetings. She continues, "I too have laid the blame on those workers, those young people. I bought into a lot of what church professionals have told me, that those people are too busy, too non-religious, too selfish. But," she says, "I don't think it's any of those things. I actually think that a lot of young people are just too plain exhausted." She says her parishioners scrounge for health care, drown in student debt, and create spreadsheets of daycare costs to see whether they can afford children. Hear that again. Scrounge for health care, drown in student debt, and create spreadsheets of daycare costs to see whether they can afford children. The economic system is not one from which her congregation can extract itself. She says it controls them. It is the main force in their life. So if the main force, if there's any truth at all to what Reverend Bixler is saying, and the main force in a lot of people 40 and younger's life is paying the mortgage, deciding, can I afford children? How can I afford the deductibles on my health care? How does the church fit into that? Do we have the next slide, please? Some think about the only way to do that is to eat a lot of ramen noodles. And they actually wrote a book about, if you're an MBA, you're studying for your advanced professional degree, and then you got to pay off the student debt. About the only way you can do it is to go on a ramen noodle diet, because you can pick them up for 99 cents at Price Chopper or Hannaford or Aldi's or wherever. And I don't know how good they'll taste, but they'll get you by. They'll get you by. So how do we, church folks, make Jesus a force in life? Reverend Bixler says, what can we do? And then she answers her own question. She goes on, I imagine the church in the future, and remember, she's a young mom, I imagine a place for myself in it, and I see myself here instilling the skills and the fire in church members to organize for just labor and social equity, for my own good and for my good of my neighbors. It's relationship, she says. She concludes, if small churches become extinct in the next generation, it will not be because preachers fail to promote the work-life balance. It will not be because younger Christians don't lack in faith. It will be because capitalism killed it. And what she's saying is it's time for the church to meet our younger friends where they are, to think differently about how we ask them to fulfill their church budget, how we ask them to enter into the life of the church, how we ask them to live out their faith. I serve on an Albany District leadership team, and we're teaching other churches how to be more vital and how to increase attendance and how to increase spirituality. There's one person I know on the team that is a young mom, and we were talking about this very thing with my friend Jamie. And Jamie said she works in healthcare, she's a professional, and she said, my biggest expense is every month is paying my student debt, I imagine that Jamie and her husband have a pretty good income, not even be into the 6 figures. But her biggest expense is paying back that student loan. And there's not many other Jamies on the district leadership team. She is the exception. She's not the rule. And that could very well be the reason why. And I know people today, I have friends in the area, they're working full time and they excel at what they do and they have a good job. But with what their employer is asking them to pay for health insurance, they're almost better off quitting and going on Medicaid. Almost better off not working and being on Medicaid, because so much of their income, even though they've excelled at what they're doing, but because of their wage in what we might call a higher level blue-collar job is only slightly above the Medicaid rate, and their employer's health insurance is so substandard and so much goes to pay that, they'd almost be better off not working. So the church has some kind of response to help these people, to understand that maybe the demands of our younger friends, the demands of those that haven't been fortunate enough to have a high-paying job, it's tough. It's really, really tough. Switching gears again just for a minute. We've done our best, the Finance Committee, to come up with a fair budget to fund the mission and ministry, to be fair to younger people, to be fair to the people that are here today for 2020. I can tell you there's a lot of effort that goes into it, and I ask your support in helping us fund it in 2020. As it looks right now, as it has for some years, the expenses exceed the income, but thankfully, we seem to close that gap with all of your help, and thank God for all of your help. Next week, you'll have opportunity to submit your pledge for 2020, and I hope that we are able to fill that gap. And if you have any questions about it at all, feel free to connect with me, and I'll do my best to try to help you out with our income and expenses and how we fund that. So getting back to how we do fund that and how we do meet people where they are, how we can be creative in our survival. Maybe an expression that I've heard might resonate. It's called flipping the narrative. Flipping the narrative. Reverend Bixler talked about it in her piece, Capitalism is Killing the Church. Our narrative is generally young people just don't want to be here, or why isn't it like the good old days? But maybe if we flip the narrative to how can we help? What can the church do to provide some relief in those student debts and those spreadsheets of childcare costs to see if you can afford to have a child in 2019? What we can do to make giving something that's more valuable and less stressful. Truth be told, probably if we had a lot of young people here, and we're not that different than most churches, so I'm not beating up on Pine Grove when I talk about the church. This is systematic, not just of the Methodist Church, but of most mainline churches. That we don't do a really good job of connecting. But those young people, by the way, they do want to make a difference in the world. But they want to make it when they can, and they want to make it in the moment. And more than likely, if they cross paths with Reggie, like I had the opportunity this morning, they would have gave him a ride down to Pearl Street to the homeless shelter, because they can make a difference. It's right there. The person needs help, and I'll go and I'll help them. You see, that's different than a church budget. It's different than saying come to a meeting on a Tuesday or Thursday night. That's right there, and you're helping immediately, and there's results. Another idea is random acts of kindness. Last Christmas Eve, the family and I went to the Village County Outreach Center. And right then and there, you could have cookies and make things that were being taken to people in need. And there were young people there. But do you see the connection? It was Christmas Eve. They could come for an hour. They could make a difference right then and there. And somehow, we need to get creative in our survival about how we meet people where they are and how we fund the budget. I don't have any magic pill for us to swallow, but I'm just thinking maybe it's a shift in our thinking. Maybe it's a shift in how we do business that says, yeah, I want to be part of that. I want to be part of something that makes a difference in the world right now. And we have this tremendous infrastructure here. A gymnasium and wings of classrooms and an absolutely gorgeous worship center, sanctuary, that maybe there's a shift in a huge dining hall, in a great parking lot, and all of you. And maybe we can shift the thinking, flip the narrative a little bit about how we do that. And finally, when it comes to giving, my thoughts always go back to a little over 20 years ago, when I wasn't quite so blessed financially as I was now. I had a $500 gross weekly paycheck, and $100 in withholding. I had $400 net pay. I was single at the time. Paid $100 weekly alimony. Paid $80 in child support until my son came back to live with me. That leaves me with $220. Thank God it was 25 years ago. I don't think $220 now would get you very far at all today. Didn't get too far back then. But then I said, how much am I going to write to my local church? Well, I was beginning this new path in life. I was recovering from a period of being broken. And I was embracing the concepts of giving to church. So almost every week I wrote a check for $50. And it hurt. You know, 220 minus 50 is 170 left over. And it hurt. But here's the strange thing. I don't know why. And I don't have any logical answers for you. But life got better. My life started to get a lot better. See, that's the God thing. That's the God piece. As we say in our communion liturgy, let us explore the mystery of faith. We are connected to God and to Jesus and the Spirit. And God honors that relationship. So sometimes if we just reach out, even when it defies logic, and give a little bit more. We don't consider giving necessarily to be the disposable income, but to be what makes us who we are, what makes us the followers of Christ. Then maybe things happen that we just can't explain. Wrap up with some thoughts from Wesley's sermon on the use of money. And these are paraphrased from Bishop Kenneth Carter, C-A-R-D-E-R, in case you want to look up Bishop Carter. And he wrote a sermon about Wesley's sermon called On Being Two-Thirds Wesleyan, and just share a piece of it. So this is from Bishop Carter talking about Wesley's sermon. A speaker at a civic club had been asked to share reasons for his success as a businessman. Bishop Carter says his attention was increased when he attributed his extraordinary financial success to John Wesley. He said, Wesley said that we are to earn all that we can and save all we can. And if we earn all that we can and save all we can, then we can invest in new business ventures. Bishop Carter says the speaker was at his best only 2/3 Methodist. Earn all you can and save all you can were the first 2 points of Wesley's sermon, but the essential and the most important point that Wesley made was that you need to give all you can. That's why Wesley preached on this particular passage over and over and over. Wesley said, how one gains wealth is a crucial test of stewardship, of relationship to God. Profit at the expense of health, integrity, honesty, or well-being is prohibited. Profit at the expense of health, integrity, honesty or well-being of others is prohibited. See, Wesley was ahead of his curve. He had that creative survival instinct. Reverend Bixler in 2019 gets that we can't have profit, we can't have greed of those that control the wealth at the expense of the worker, or else there's not enough to share. The church has always stood up for those that are being exploited. It doesn't mean that every person is greedy, but some are. Conclude with this paraphrase from Bishop Carter on Wesley's thoughts. Wesley's admonition to give was no pious rhetoric designed to increase contributions to church budgets. It was a plea for generosity rooted in gratitude for God's generosity, and a plea for compassion for the poor and the needy. He contended that no member of the Methodists should ever be hungry or poorly housed or inadequately clothed. If Methodists would give all they can, then everyone would have enough. Luke's parable of the steward provided the basis of at least 27 of Wesley's sermons. To Wesley, the basic point of the parable is that God holds us accountable for our stewardship, and that accountability is based on investing in the lives of others. The great commandment, we need to love God and we need to love others, no exception. We need to give to make the world a better place. Amen?
Amen.
Amen.